What's going on, vinyl community? Welcome to another video with the Record Spinner. In today's video, I'm going to be ranking the Genesis studio catalog, and this was tough because I'll admit I am extremely biased because as big of fans my parents are of Genesis and they handed that torch on to me, they heavily subjected me to the earlier, more progressive material. So I have a bit of a closeness to those early records, and with this ranking, I really needed to focus on the entire scope of their career and discography. So it was very tough compiling this ranking, but after countless revisions, I can say that I am pleased with where each album stands. Now, let me emphasize by saying that this ranking is solely my opinion. It is neither right or wrong. If you think And Then There Were Three is their best album, then I respect your opinion, but who knows? We might see eye to eye on some things. So enough of the chit chat. Let's jump into what this video is all about. So there are 15 Genesis studio albums, and coming in at number 15 at the bottom of the barrel is this one. Let's face it, we all saw this coming. 1997's Calling All Stations. Now, this is notable for featuring singer Ray Wilson at the vocal mic, since Phil Collins had left the band at this point. And honestly, very ballsy move for Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford to consider continuing on as Genesis without Phil Collins. Because when you think about it, at least in my opinion, and I'm sure many others would agree, I would say it's partly due to Phil's solo career being such a huge success in the 80s that perhaps contributed to the success that Genesis had in the 80s. And when you take away such an integral and important member that is partly responsible for the band having its success, then it's a very hard pill to swallow, and fans were certainly divided. I mean, this album fared okay in Europe, but when in America, when you have to cancel an entire US tour, the writing is on the wall. So as of filming this video, this is their last album. And Ray Wilson does have a nice voice, kind of guttery in some areas, reminiscent of Peter Gabriel, but there is just something missing. You know, Phil was such a great middleman between Tony and Mike when it came to the musical ideas. But even though I say that, there are some decent moments on here, such as the opening title track. The big single off of this was Congo. We also have Shipwreck, which is pretty good. Not About Us is a pretty good track. That's one of the few tracks that Ray Wilson had actually contributed to. There's also The Dividing Line, which is pretty cool. One Man's Fool. So there are some decent moments, but you know, just because it does not have that distinctive Phil Collins, you know, vocal stylings on this, it just kind of sinks all the way down to the bottom. Coming in at number 14 is this album. 1991's We Cant Dance. This was Phil Collins' last album with the band. There are some great tracks on this record, such as the opener No Son of Mine, which is just absolutely awesome. Jesus, He Knows Me, which is a great little stab at televangelists and how they are in the tabloids for the wrong reasons. It's a nice little funny track, especially the video. It's absolutely awesome. I Can't Dance, which of course features that music video with the infamous walk that they do. Some people don't like it, but it's a bit of good fun. Hold On My Heart, which is a great ballad. We also have some really great epics on here, such as Driving the Last Spike, the closing track, Fading Lights, which is just absolutely fantastic. If, let's say, this was to be the last ever Genesis album, I think Fading Lights is a great epitaph to leave a musical legacy on. But the reason why, you know, even though I say there are some great songs on this, the reason why it's at the bottom for me is because this was made during the CD era, and this was back when bands said, hey, we have a CD, let's fill it up to the brim with as much stuff as possible. So you get tracks on here like Never a Time, Living Forever, Way of the World, and Since I Lost You, which I feel like they just exist on the album for just taking up space. I think if they were to kind of cut off some of the dead weight on this album, it would rank a little higher because the songs on here are awesome. There's just a lot of extra stuff that we don't necessarily need. Coming in at number 13 is this album. Yes, we are taking a little trip back to 1969's From Genesis to Revelation. This is the band's very first album, and it is unlike anything in their entire discography. So basically, they were still students over at Charterhouse when they made this album. They got together with Jonathan King, who signed them and produced this record. And basically, it is very much a product of the time. It bears rarely any resemblance to the progressive rock sound that they would innovate on their next LP that came after this. So I guess you could describe this best as like psychedelic baroque pop with songs such as When the Sour Turns to Sweet, In the Beginning, In the Wilderness. They're all very charming songs. There's also The Silent Sun, which was their very first single, very much a Bee Gees pastiche. It's a very charming record, but it's just so hard to think that this band would then make Supper's Ready. It's just so crazy to compute that. This is an album that tends to get overlooked a lot. I mean, the band touches on it, like, in terms of their, various documentaries and whatnot, but it doesn't really get a whole lot of emphasis. Maybe that's because the band does not own the rights to it, and any reissue or repressing that comes out of this is not sanctioned by the band. And also, just fans don't really look at this as being their first proper album. They tend to look at Trespass as being their first proper album. But it does have its bright spots, but it is just so unlike traditional Genesis that we all know and love. Coming in at number 12 is this album. 1983's Genesis, or the self-titled album, the Mama album, as some people refer to it as. This album is interesting in terms of how they went about recording it. So basically, at this point, they had their own recording studio called The Farm in Surrey. And they basically set up shop and they just wrote the record as they recorded it. So no members brought in songs that were already pre-written. Everything was organically written as they recorded it, which is a rather interesting working environment, I should say. The real strengths of this album appear in the first half of it, and then it kind of veers off a little bit. Starts out strong with a track like Mama, which includes that rather infamous laugh, which is derivative of Grandmaster Flash. We have a huge hit single with That's All. Then we have the big kind of epic of this record, which is Home by the Sea / Second Home by the Sea. And then on side B, for starts, we have Illegal Alien. And then it's honestly after that the album kind of just drifts off a little bit with tracks such as Taking It All Too Hard, Just a Job to Do, Silver Rainbow, and it's going to get better. They're not bad, but they don't stand up to the caliber as the other songs in the first half of this record. But nonetheless, it is rather decent. Coming in at number 11 is this album. 1986's Invisible Touch. Now, this album here is Genesis at its commercial peak. When you have multiple hit singles coming off of one album, your music videos are getting played on MTV, and you're selling out multiple nights at Wembley Stadium, it's safe to say that that is the pinnacle of your career. This album, basically half of it is hits. You have the opening title track, Land of Confusion, In Too Deep, Throwing It All Away. And I always say this, even though this album is full of hits, even at this point, they were still rather progressive because there are some epics on here, particularly Tonight, 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 which I believe did get edited down for a single, but it appears at a much longer length on the album. And then the big one, which the band members tend to have a lot of love for, and they say that it's one of their best kind of live show moments, is the track Domino, which is just absolutely awesome. And then it ends with the quirky instrumental, The Brazilian. So, as much as I hate to use the term prog snobs tend to knock this album down, you really got to give it to these guys, because even though this album has some great, catchy, poppier kind of tunes, there are some still rather cool, progressive, longer epics to get you through. Really solid album. Coming in at number 10 is this album. 1970's Trespass. Now, this is the album that a lot of fans would consider to be the first proper Genesis album, simply because it bears the resemblance of the progressive rock sound that the band would delve more into with future albums. I would say this is best described as being like acoustic progressive folk, because in the early days, Genesis were primarily an acoustic band working in a lot of 12-string acoustic guitar arrangements, but then as the songs would build up, they would gradually incorporate some more electrified, amplified moments, particularly on a track like Stagnation, which I would say is the key track on this album. And there are some other awesome songs on here, such as Looking for Someone and White Mountain, but The climax of this album is the barn burner, The Knife. It is a stage favorite. It is one of the band's most heaviest musical moments. It is absolutely sensational. And this album is significant for being the only album to feature John Mayhew on drums. And it is also Anthony Phillips' last album. And he left the band shortly after this album had come out. And band members have said that they almost consider packing it in when Anthony left because he was such an integral member. He also appeared on From Genesis to Revelation. So he is a rather key member that sometimes gets overlooked because we all know the classic lineup as it is. But when you trace back to the true origins of Genesis, a lot of it does come from Anthony. So I think this album is a perfect showcase for his talents and abilities. Coming in at number 9 is this album, 1981's Abbot. Now, this album, I think, is extremely important, and that's partly to do with the engineer that worked on this album with the band. It's a guy by the name of Hugh Padgham. He had worked with Phil Collins on his Face Value solo album, and he also worked with Peter Gabriel on his third solo album. He brought in a lot of fresh blood and fresh ideas to the band with this album, and I think he perfectly adapted Genesis in the 80s with this record. This is a perfect bridge that connects everything that happened before and everything that they would do after. So really, really important album, this one. Opens up with the title track, Abbot, which when you spell it out, Abacab, it's supposed to be like an order for a song arrangement, but oddly enough, the song itself does not follow that arrangement. Then we have No Reply at All, which features the Earth, Wind, and Fire horns. We have a quirky number from Tony Banks called Me and Sarah Jane. Keep It Dark, which is one of my personal favorites. The big epic on this album is Dodo/Lurker. And then we have the Genesis punk new wave track called Who Done It, which a lot of people tend to think that is the worst Genesis song ever. I think it's a good bit of fun, especially when you see them perform it in the Three Sides live concert film when Phil Collins has the goggles on and everything. It's a good bit of fun. Man on the Corner, which is pretty cool, has a pretty cool drum machine loop going on throughout the track. Then it ends with Like It or Not and Another Record. Very important album, and if you've overlooked this one, definitely give it a chance. You will not be disappointed. Coming in at number 8 is this album, 1978's And Then There Were Three. The album's title is perfectly reflective of what was going on with the band at the time because And Then There Were Three. Steve Hackett had left the band at this point, so the band is now a three-piece. And with this one, the band's kind of going for more kind of shorter song kind of compositions, but they are still packing in so much great musicianship and instrumentation with this album. It opens up with perhaps my favorite Genesis album opener, and that is Down and Out. It delivers so much drive and so much power. It is the best way to kick this album off. Undertow, which is a Tony Banks composition, which is quite good. Ballad of Big, Snowbound, Many Too Many, which was released as a single, which is relatively good. My favorite track on this is Scenes from a Night Stream, The Lady Lies, which is awesome. And then the big surprise on this album is that they had a hit single with the closing track, Follow You, Follow Me, which back before this album had come out, the Genesis fan base was a primarily male fan base, but it was once they had a hit single with Follow You, Follow Me that there were a couple more females at their shows. So this is an album that often gets, overlooked and is very much underrated. I'd say definitely give this album a chance. There are a lot of great tunes on it. It's definitely worth listening to. Coming in at number 7 is this album, 1971's Nursery Crime. Now, this album is notable for being the first album to feature the classic Genesis lineup of Peter Gabriel, Tony Banks, Mike Rutherford, Steve Hackett, and Phil Collins. Opens up with the musical box, which is a staple of the early Genesis repertoire. Anthony Phillips did have a hand in crafting the acoustic 12-string bit at the very beginning of the song, and when performed live, Peter would come out in the Fox's Head or the red dress or the old man outfit and sing out that last verse. So that's a prime early example of Peter Gabriel working in some theatrics to Genesis music. Then we have a nice little acoustic tune called For Absent Friends, which is a perfect showcase for the two new guys in the band at the time, Steve and Phil. Then we have one of my personal favorites, The Return of the Giant Hogweed, which is just absolutely adventurous. Then on the B-side, we have some under-the-radar tunes, such as the dramatic Seven Stones, the comedic Harold the Barrel, Harlequin, which kind of sounds like an offcut off of like Trespass, but the album ends so strong with the Fountain of Salmacis, those big mellotron chords at the end with the harmonies and Steve Hackett's guitar solo. It ends the album just absolutely beautifully. It is just perfection. Coming in at number 6 is this album, 1976's Wind and Wuthering. This was Steve Hackett's last album with the band, and very much a romantic kind of album. It opens up with two huge epics, 11th Earl of Mar and One for the Vine. One for the Vine is just absolutely beautiful, and it has that awesome, crazy piano middle section, which is good fun. The band had a minor hit with the track Your Own Special Way, which I would say is like their proggiest kind of ballad. It's very beautiful. Then we have some crazy bits such as What Gorilla, All in a Mouse's Night. The big key track / highlight on this album, and I think this is a perfect showcase of Steve Hackett's talents, is the track Blood on the Rooftops. He primarily wrote the tune, and it has that great acoustic nylon guitar bit in the very beginning. It is just beautiful. Then we have Unquiet Slumbers for the Sleepers going into In That Quiet Earth. Great instrumental passage, and then that goes right into the closing track, Afterglow, which is another big highlight on this album, and a great stage number 2, especially on that last verse when they have the pink lights behind the band and all the dry ice. It just looks absolutely awesome. An absolutely beautiful record indeed. Coming in at number 5 is this one, 1980's Duke. Now, I think this is a far more confident album compared to the one that came before this, which was And Then There Were Three. Basically, the band had kind of took some time off from each other. Each member did their own solo projects, and they reconvened and did this album, and it just seems more focused, I feel. It opens up strong with Behind the Lines, which goes right into Duchess, and then it goes right into the great small bit called Guide Vocal, which is just absolutely beautiful. The first 12 minutes of the album, flawless. And then we have some hits on here, such as Misunderstanding and Turn It On Again. We also have Phil coming more to his own on this album in terms of being a primary songwriter, with him having contributed Misunderstanding as well as the song Please Don't Ask, because around this time he was also gathering up material for his first solo album, Face Value. And then the album closes with one of their best instrumental pieces, Duke's Travels, going into Duke's End. And the reason why those two closing numbers are titled that, because originally this was going to feature a big 25-minute epic track, which consisted of Behind the Lines, Duchess, Guide Vocal, Turn It On Again, Duke's Travels, and Duke's End. So I suppose the titles worked so well that they stayed that way for the album, but I think it would have been interesting to see what the public thought if they would have followed through with that kind of epic formula, but they thought that there would be too many, I guess, comparisons to the biggest notable epic in their catalog, which is Supper's Ready. But it's an absolutely solid album, and some of the other tracks on here that kind of lie in deep cut territory, like Man of Our Times, Alone Tonight, and Cul-de-sac, are relatively good as well. Very solid album indeed. Coming in at number 4 is this album, 1976's A Trick of the Tail. This was the first album to feature Phil Collins singing lead vocals, and I have a major soft spot for this album because it is indeed my gateway drug into the world of Genesis. I remember listening to this album for the first time as a kid. Opening track, Dance of the Volcano, came on. Loved the droning bass pedals at the very beginning, and towards the end, that crazy fusion middle section sold me like that. It is just absolutely amazing. Then we have a beautiful acoustic piece on here called Entangled, which goes into what I think is the best Genesis concert opener, and that is Squonk. Then we have the epic Madman Moon, Robbery, Assault, and Battery. Then we have the beautiful piece, Ripples, the title track, which is almost kind of poppy in some areas, kind of quirky. And then it ends with the great instrumental Los Endos, which reprises various bits and pieces of the album. An absolute solid record. Very important too, because at this point, Peter Gabriel obviously had left the band, and they were unsure exactly where the band was going to go. They didn't know if they could really survive without Pete, since he provided so much imagery and theatricality to the band. And basically, when this album came out, they earned a lot more success than they did when Peter was in the band, and it basically set them off on the right track. So it's a very important album, and it's one that I have a major soft spot for. Coming in at number 3 is this album, 1972's Foxtrot. This opens up with the dramatic mellotron chords of Watcher of the Skies, which is a great opener for the album and a great stage opener. And when performed live, Peter would come out with the bat wings headpiece and the colorful cape. Fantastic stuff. Then we have a bit of a shorter song called Timetable, which kind of follows the traditional verse, chorus kind of structure. It's one of my favorites. And then we have some other great tracks on here, such as Get 'Em Out by Friday, Can Utility and the Coastliners. We have a small acoustic piece from Steve Hackett, which is based on a Bach piece called Horizons. And then the rest of the record has given way to perhaps the crown jewel of the Genesis catalog and the key track of the Peter Gabriel years, and that is Supper's Ready. And I think with that track, the band was working towards a certain goal. You know, starting from Trespass, going into Nursery Crime, and then approaching Foxtrot. They were working towards a goal, and they finally achieved it with that track, because each member is giving their all on this track. It starts off rather acoustic like early Genesis works, but then it takes a bit of a turn in the middle with the Willow Farm section, which when you hear it, you can automatically picture Peter Gabriel prancing around in the flower headpiece, which is just crazy bonkers. Then we have the Apocalypse and 9/8 section, which is just absolutely dramatic. It's the ultimate fight between good versus evil. And then it ends triumphantly with the New Jerusalem bit. Honestly, depending on the day and how I'm feeling, when I listen to Supper's Ready at times, tears will roll down my eyes. It just gets you that much. It is such a powerful performance and such an amazing song. And honestly, for being about 23 minutes long, I have listened to that track so many times that it doesn't even feel that long. That's the crazy part. Fantastic stuff. And to be honest, the reason why this album is so high up is because Supper's Ready is on it, and that track is so significant to the Genesis legacy. Coming in at number 2 is this album, 1974's The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. This was Peter Gabriel's last album with Genesis. This is an ambitious double LP concept album which tells the story of a Puerto Rican guy named Rael who roams the streets of New York City, encounters many different characters, and encounters all kinds of different situations. Very much like a Pilgrim's Progress and a trip of self-discovery. A rather interesting concept, but you know that you've kind of tried to cram it in onto 2 LPs and try to space it out as much as you possibly could, that you have to feature the storyline in the gatefold sleeve so you can kind of follow through with it and it kind of makes more sense. But the reason why this is at the number 2 spot is because I feel that this is the best Genesis was ever musically. Opens up with the title track, which sets the tone perfectly for the album. It's a stage favorite. Then we have the greatest single musical Genesis moment on Fly on a Windshield. How it starts off with just the keyboards and the vocals, and then as the vocals kind of wither away, the band kicks right in, and it is in your face. Ooh, I'm just getting goosebumps just thinking about it. Then we have In the Cage, which is a big stage number. Back in New York City, one of the band's heaviest tunes. Peter delivering this very kind of shouting, angsty kind of vocal delivery. Carpet Crawlers, big stage favorite. It's a Genesis classic. Then we have a beautiful piece on here called the Lamia, which when performed live, when the band played the Lamb live from start to finish on the tour, this screen would come down around Gabriel and would spin around, and it had the three women snake-like figures on it, which was part of the whole theatrical production of it. Then we have the Colony of Slippermen, which had Peter in the Slipperman outfit, which had all kinds of spots and stuff. It was definitely perhaps going a bit too far theatrically. He was just kind of testing the bounds of rock theater in every possible sense. But perhaps that's kind of what kind of irritated the band, because it seemed like, you know, it was basically Peter's band and the critics would applaud Peter and kind of forget about the rest of the band, which is a real shame because the band is absolutely killing it on this album. But it is just absolutely adventurous musically, and I'm going to be honest, I feel bad for any Genesis fan that goes to this as their first Genesis album, because they will have the deer in the headlights look. Because, I mean, it's a hefty meal to take in. It's 2 LPs, but also the fact that it's a concept album as well. It's a lot to take in, but it's definitely worth checking out later on if someone is approaching Genesis for the first time. But it's an absolute adventure of an album, fantastic musically, and like I said, it's the best they ever were on record. And that leaves one more album to fulfill the #1 spot. And did you guys kind of see this coming? 1973's Selling England by the Pound. I think this is the quintessential Genesis album. Very much a homage to their English roots. This is a very English album. Opens with the epic Dancing with the Moonlit Night, which features Peter Gabriel singing a cappella. And then we have the band's first real big single with I Know What I Like, which is a great kind of Beatlesy kind of tune. Further Fifth, which is an absolute staple in the Genesis canon. It features that signature Steve Hackett guitar solo in the middle, along with the main piano riff done by Tony Banks. Then we have a great little track on here called More Fool Me, which Phil Collins sings lead on, kind of in the vein of Simon and Garfunkel a little bit, in my opinion. It's a beautiful piece. Then we have the rapid 100 words per minute track, The Battle of Epping Forest, which tells the story of, you know, territories within the area of Epping Forest in England, which is just an absolute trip of a song. And then we have what I think is one of the most overlooked Genesis instrumentals / tracks, After the Ordeal, which Steve Hackett had penned. He really brought this song back to life when I saw him on his Wolflight tour, as you can see with the shirt I'm wearing. He performed that song live, and it made me realize how brilliant the song really is. It is just absolutely beautiful. There is some great acoustic guitar work in the middle, and there's just this great electric solo towards the end. It is just perfect. And then we have the epic Cinema Show, which is just absolutely wonderful. That instrumental section was performed live frequently by the band in the live set. And then it wraps up with the track Isle of Plenty, which kind of has play on words with various, you know, English brands of the time. It's truly English, and I feel that this album has all of the essential qualities that one would want in a Genesis album. It has a lot of landmark instrumental bits and pieces. We have singles such as I Know What I Like, crazy epics like Dancing with the Moonlit Night, Cinema Show, Battle of Epping Forest. It's absolutely perfect, and I think it's, in my opinion, their best album. So there you guys go. That is my ranking of the Genesis Studio catalog. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead, give it a like, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support this channel, be sure to check me out on Patreon. See you guys in the next video, and most importantly, keep the records spinning.